Hello and welcome to the Inside Insights webinar presented by JWT Inside. This webinar series focuses on trends in recruitment and employer branding. Today's webinar topic is Recruitment and Retention Trends for 2015. This webinar will be recorded and available for viewing shortly after the presentation is over. Anyone who registered for this webinar will receive a link to access this recording via email. If you use Twitter and would like to participate in live tweeting during this webinar, we welcome you to tweet us at JWTInside and use the hashtag InsideInsights. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation, please type them into the Q&A box. The Q&A box is visible when you hover your mouse over the control bar at the top of the screen. We will pause occasionally throughout the presentation to answer any immediate questions and address any final questions at the end of the presentation in the remainder of the 1-hour time frame allotted for this webinar. Today's presenters will be Kai Yen, Chief Technology Officer, and Stephen Nemeth, Experience Planner. And now, I kick off the presentation. I turn it over to Kai.
Thank you, Olivia. Thanks everybody for joining. These trends webinars are some of our favorite ones to do, and we do these more than once a year just because so many of our clients are interested in finding out what's going on and just staying on top of those trends. You know, you can't always take advantage of all of them and jump on, always be an early adopter of everything, but it's so great to always know kind of what's coming and just pay attention to that so that you can be ready. And for some particular trends, it's just going to be a lot easier for you to capitalize on those. And the trends thing, in addition, is really always been part of kind of JWT's heritage. And we have a group within JWT called JWT Intelligence that really explores a lot of consumer trends that are pretty amazing. So they have a great website I'll just plug for them. That's jwtintelligence.com. And when you go there, it's a blog with some amazing thought leadership around trends that are going on. And they have some great trend reports. Some of the current trend reports they've got are they have a brand new one that's the Future 100, which is 100 trends to watch for 2015. They've got the future of payments and currency. They have one called Meet the New Family. And there's a whole kind of whole slew of other really great pieces. And one of the things that I really love about those, even though they're made to be consumer focused, we all know from being in the employment side for so long that trends from the consumer side always trickle into the employment side. And for folks who are able to identify early which ones actually make sense for employment, I think you really get a jump on everybody else. So we really love to kind of watch those. And for these trends, we've partnered with our JWT Intelligence group to come up with 4 key trends that we think are really amazing for everyone to kind of keep in mind in the employment space, as it relates to talent acquisition and retention of employees. A lot of these really get at kind of culture and how it is that you tap into that and leverage it to, improve the programs that you have going. So we have 4 kind of key trends. These are sort of large ones. And the format for these, just so that you kind of understand how we're going to present them, we have kind of a very quick summary of the trend. We talk about kind of some examples in the wild that you would, where you'd see this trend kind of taking place. And then we have 2 sort of ways for you to take advantage of it. We have kind of like the strategic side, which is something that's going to take a little bit more thought for how to work into your program. But this is kind of gives you opportunities for ways to really capture the trend and integrate it into your program from that strategic perspective. But then we also provided, because we know everybody loves this, we also provided some kind of tactical quick wins. These are things that you can just jump on today to incorporate into your program. They don't really require a lot of kind of like planning and strategy. It's really more things that you can just get started on right away. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephen and have him take you through those 4 trends. So Stephen, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Kai. And I also did want to note that as much as we love JWT Intelligence, we also do a lot of thought leadership on our own blog. And if you haven't checked out our we recently updated our website. And if you haven't checked it out, definitely go check it out. It's jwtinside.com. And if you want to check out our blog, it's jwtinside.com/blog. It's a very clever title that we've got for that. And all these trends that we're presenting today in one form or another have come through our blog, so we've gone into them a little bit more in depth there, so always feel free to go back to that as a reference point if you miss a couple things today. So without further ado, let's dive right in. The first trend that we have is authenticity becomes authentic, which sounds a little funny on its face, I realize. But authenticity has been working around in the brand space for a while now, and everybody's wanting to be an authentic brand and really doing something kind of cool. But the question is, what does authenticity really mean? And really what we're saying now is this is about honesty. It's about brands being honest, not because necessarily they want to be honest, but because, in fact, they have to be honest. The social platforms that we're looking at right now are really keeping employer brands honest. I think the best example in this space is Glassdoor. It's pretty hard to put out an amazingly well-crafted brand message if your internal culture isn't that great. So it's really important to sort of understand how employees are perceiving you, how candidates are perceiving you, and importantly, how alumni are perceiving you, and really begin to understand how you can leverage authenticity and a truly authentic brand story to really say something different in the space. What's really interesting here too is when you're looking to capture that trend, it really goes back to the mega trend that we've seen over the last couple of years, and something that we really believe it will be the mega trend that drives this space for the next 10 years, which is really about your culture story. What makes you unique, and importantly, how that aligns with and is part of your employer brand. This is probably the biggest driver of employer brands that really succeed. And generally, when we look at it, the thing that almost inevitably fails when an employer brand isn't working for candidates and employees. So what you really want to look to here on their culture story is to understand truthfully and honestly what's making you unique. So that might be things like the way you communicate, the way that you interact with each other, and it might be have some hard truths in there, frankly. You might have things there that says, you know, we are highly competitive. The key for you is understanding that culture, embracing that culture, and finding a way to tell that story in a way that's going to appeal to the right candidates, to sort of find those candidates that are really going to fit with your brand. So when we look at, you know, what are the quick wins here? Really the best thing that you could do is to fix your culture page, but I guess that kind of first starts out with, do you have a culture page? A lot of companies' culture page exists of primarily a section that just lists out their mission, vision, and values, if that. And that's really not what we're talking about here. Although those are important, what's really important on your culture page is to show how those mission, vision, values come to life every day for the people that work there. So easy ways to do this are to really kind of think about how could I really talk about the style of communication and the personalities in our office, right? You sort of know the style of person who really succeeds in your company. Talk about that style of person. Don't just give employee stories, but talk about the attributes of those people. If a quirky culture pervades your office, let that be okay, because that's kind of who you are, and the right candidates are really going to be attracted to that. Also, you want to show how you interact with each other. So although it seems mundane, showing things like behind the scenes of a meeting or behind the scenes of a collaboration session can really say a lot about your culture. If you're a culture, for instance, here, we love to sketch and whiteboard. And that's something that we really like to show off, is that, you know, to potential candidates is, hey, you know, we like to collaborate. We're about face-to-face interaction. We're about sort of working together, talking about ideas and hashing them out. That's a really important part of our culture, and our candidates, we feel like, should know that.
You know, this kind of reminds me, Stephen, about, you know, for when you mentioned sort of that meeting style, that I kind of, like, one of the most authentic things that I can think about with kind of JBT's culture is that, you know, we have these little chat rooms all around the office that we use for lots of, you know, these little meetings here and there. But part of that experience is trying to find one when you need to have that meeting. And I can kind of imagine this little video of, like, us running around, like, checking all of the nearby chat rooms, like, oh, that one's busy, that one's busy, that one's busy. But just that little, like, a little segment that might be kind of fun and maybe even funny is kind of so true to what our culture's like, because that is what happens kind of before most of our meetings, like our little informal meetings.
And I think to that point, right, if you have that video, there's a really good opportunity here from a copy standpoint to sort of pair that with why we have to search for chat rooms, which is because so many people around here are discussing ideas and whiteboarding things out, and it's not a solitary environment. So that gets, I think, really well to the way that you can sort of bring that culture page to life. You know, if your culture page just right now says that, oh, we're fun, show how you're fun and show the unique way in which you're fun, because that really is, frankly, the thing that we're seeing as the biggest driver in the space of why candidates are coming to brands. And actually, a lot of these trends that we're going to discuss today reflect sort of shift in behaviors as millennials really enter the workforce sort of en masse, as you see boomers beginning to retire, and as we're sort of anticipating the rise of Gen Z coming up, although they're pretty young now, we're definitely going to see a cohort that is far more concerned about with the way you do things and how you sort of express your individual culture. So moving on to the next trend, and this kind of brings it back, I guess, to the millennials to a degree, is really about a culture of personalization. This is driven actually by a larger sort of consumer trend in the space, which is around big data. For those of you who might be familiar or unfamiliar with it, big data is really about this idea that instead of just taking these sort of little snapshots in time of, you know, that looks at a very specific question, it's really about the idea of sort of aggregating a bunch of data together to sort of identify key trends, key insights. So a great example of this is actually in fitness trackers, which are really a big part of the big data movement. So it's instead of typically, you know, old data, let's say, would have looked at people and said, okay, well, how often do you exercise? Big data uses real-time data, real-time feedback to say, okay, how are people actually moving around? Puts that together in a big bundle and then has people with a bunch of big brains kind of go through that data and see, okay, what trends can we see and what are the implications of that? What this means in the candidate and employee space is actually really interesting. So it goes to looking at something a little bit bigger than just how engaged are employees, how happy are employees, are we getting a good quality of candidate, but rather what types of characteristics do those candidates exhibit? And importantly, what trends might we be seeing in terms of the lifestyle of the people that we're actually attracting? This has that's going to have a lot of implications for the benefits that you decide to offer, for the way you decide to position yourself, and especially in terms of the style of messaging and candidate experience that you decide to offer. So the broader way to capture this trend is starting a data gathering program. If you haven't already done that, this is a huge opportunity and really beginning to sort of say, what is our data collection strategy? Again, you need to go beyond just the annual employee engagement survey and figure out how you can get more real-time data in here that understands how employees are actually living and thriving in your organization. You can also develop candidate personas. For those who aren't terribly familiar with personas, it's a little bit different than a traditional audience segmentation. So whereas the traditional audience segmentation might say, okay, well, we've got people in this job role that we want to hire, so hospitals come to mind. So we've got nurses that we want to hire, we've got allied health that we want to hire, we've got physicians that we want to hire. A persona sort of cross-cuts that and actually looks at what are those behaviors and motivations and needs. So it's really trying to understand the candidate at a much more sort of philosophical level. It's trying to understand how that candidate thinks and maybe even why they chose that profession in the first place. And then trying to match actions against that, so it's a really powerful story. What you can do here then is once you've got those personas developed, think about your candidate experience. So for instance, if one of your personas is, let's say, a working mom who is maybe re-entering the workplace, and really you know that she doesn't have time, but she's got her mobile phone on 24 hours a day, you want to make sure that your candidate experience is really attuned to the mobile user and has a lot of quick get content, because you know that, frankly, like if she's running around with a small child, she's not going to have a lot of time to sit down and watch your 2-hour brand video. So these are sort of things that you can sort of begin to consider. How can I personalize this experience? And really kind of an interesting way from our perspective is to think about the idea of the sort of the benefits package, right? This is something that almost everybody does. You get your offer letter, you get your benefits package, and it's usually in a folder or some like horribly formatted PDF that doesn't really say anything. And really what we want to explore here is what actually if you brought that to life and really customize that. So we think that there's a really awesome opportunity here to take that benefits package and knowing that candidate and knowing what their desires and motivations are, say, you know what, I'm going to call out a few things that might be really important that they might miss otherwise. So for that working mother, calling out flex time, being able to call out the ability to work from home and having a really a strong working culture that actually supports and encourages working from home might be something that could really sway a candidate towards your position.
Yeah, I love the idea of that, and I'm just thinking, right, it doesn't have to be, rewriting a bunch of benefits materials. It might even be as simple as sort of a custom cover page that goes on top of the benefits package that really gets at kind of the key things. And I think that would really go a long way towards helping to kind of confirm some offers where somebody might be on the fence about, especially like you say, millennials find different benefits more interesting to them than somebody who's, more of like a baby boomer. Absolutely. So just calling out the specific ones that you think are of value to them, or even showing that, maybe during the kind of the recruitment process that you listened to them and they had told you the one that they thought was most valuable on your list, and then calling that, that specifically out. I think there's just lots of great things like that.
And this is actually probably one of the easiest areas. There's so much you can do in personalization today. There's even, if you want to get a little bit more tech heavy on this, developing custom landing pages for either certain personas that you're trying to recruit, or even for individual candidates that say, hey, high-value candidate, I made this specific landing page to you. Here are 3 employee stories I think are going to be really interesting to you. Here's some benefits I think are going to be really important to you. And here's an area where you can sort of chat with someone who's just like you. That's a really big opportunity in this space. And certainly if you're interested in how you might be able to personalize your candidate experience, we can talk with you about that a little bit more.
We have a question from the audience. They want to know, do you feel that most HR organizations would have the capabilities to map out personas?
Absolutely, and I can tell you the reason is because we've done it. That really is, it does require a little bit of investment, not really heavy investment. Typically it's done in relation to sort of refreshing or developing employer brand. And what it usually involves is a combination of sort of more traditional survey data that kind of looks at candidate motivators, but also sort of new hire motivators often as a proxy for those candidates. But also a lot of it, what it will be sort of, 15-minute, 30-minute one-on-one conversations that get a little bit more about sort of what people are kind of thinking. It's usually a process that I recommend not necessarily unto itself, but actually part of a larger thing of understanding, your brand. But definitely it can be done. It's usually something that takes, I'd say probably under, a month and a half from start to finish, including the survey to sort of get done. And what's really fantastic about having those personas in hand is it actually really gives you a guidepost on how to begin to develop your candidate experience. And it's really easy from an agency perspective to begin to use those personas to say, I know now what channels I need to be reaching, I know what devices I need to be reaching, and I actually can build out a roadmap from there of how to develop that candidate experience 3 months to 3 years in the future against those personas.
I'm gonna read a little bit also into that question and ask, in addition, what about for like folks in an HR department to like do it yourself?
Yeah, so for folks who are in the in an HR department and want to do it themselves, there's some really great resources out there. One of the things that I would just Google around, there are a bunch of different ways to structure them. You'll find it usually in user experience books, but if you want to look at a really quick and easy way to do this, look at something called Lean UX Personas. It's actually something that you can do with a talent team as sort of a day-long exercise where you get in a room and there's sort of step-by-step instructions on how to develop these personas. Step in a room and you really begin to talk about not just the roles we have, but what are the types of people we have in this organization, really being open and honest about kind of who those people are, being very authentic, I guess, and beginning to actually map that out against Post-it notes, say what are their behaviors, what are their motivations, and what might their needs be, both from a technology angle, from a messaging angle, and from a sort of benefits and candidate experience angle.
Oh, that's great. So we'll include in kind of like a leave behind email after the webinar, we'll include some book suggestions and kind of links to the Lean UX personas that Stephen mentioned, and other things we mentioned earlier, like about JBT intelligence. All that stuff will be in the like an email you guys will get. So that'll be coming. You can look forward to it. Great.
So the if I can get this click over, fortunately I'm in a little trouble. Oh no. Let's go back quick. I didn't want to reveal the whole thing. The next trend that we want to talk about is the rise of experience ecosystems. This is a little bit probably more abstract, I'd say, of a trend, but this was really looking at the idea that, you know, we've talked about candidate experience, which really, for all intents and purposes, has meant for most people, how do they get to my website, how do they use my website, and maybe how do I interact with them along the way. But we think there's a more interesting story here, which is sort of all the facets that can really impact somebody's view of your brand. One thing that we've been really interested in at JWT Inside is around the idea of a complementary experience. So this is really distinct from sort of the primary experience. So think about it this way. If your career site offers the primary experience and a lot of those core functions of sort of getting a job and really interacting heavily into that specific action, the complementary experience can sort of drive awareness and drive knowledge and offer a little bit more tangential information about the brand. So it may not necessarily be the thing that sort of makes you jump into applying for a job, but it's definitely the type of thing that can offer a lot of opportunities when it comes to lead generation, and it gives you a different way to sort of tell your brand story. One thing that I think is really, really interesting here is Airbnb, who some of you may be familiar with. It's a way for people to actually rent out rooms in their apartment or home, and sort of it's a quasi-hotel-like service. But what Airbnb did this year was they actually launched a magazine called Pineapple, which was about sort of traveling to these places. We think this is a really good example of sort of complementary experience that isn't necessarily going to tell you how to book Airbnb or sort of what those offerings are like, but actually gives you a sense of the brand broadly. You can look at things like the Apple Watch too, which really offer an interesting area of sort of complementary experience, right? It doesn't give you all the functionality of an iPhone, but it definitely gives you sort of enough to sort of lead you into using your iPhone and sort of gives you enough at-a-glance context for the primary experience. The biggest area in this space that I would say, and this is something that we see rising in the recruitment space and the retention space, is brand journalism. What do we mean when we're talking about brand journalism, and how is this different from sort of social storytelling? Brand journalism is really about sort of not talking about the specific features of your product, let's say, or the specific kind of actionable items, but rather telling a broader story about the things that, you know, if your brand were a person, they would find kind of interesting. So the interesting thing, so we were talking earlier about, let's say, Jif as a brand, not the computer thing, but actually like the brand of peanut butter, right? It's choosy moms choose Jif. I think that's the tag. So if I were doing a brand journalism strategy if I'm doing the recruitment and brand journalism for Jif, I might sit there and say, okay, we've got choosy moms choose Jif in our line, so there's something really interesting about the working mother. And maybe that's an opportunity for us to do some brand journalism around the top 10 things choosy moms choose, or the most important aspects to being a working mother today. Maybe there's a whole web series on that. So it isn't necessarily content that's going to say, hey, come work for Jif, but it's saying we care about the same things that you care about, and it gives people a better reason to actually interact with your brand, because you know what, honestly, there's only so many times a candidate wants to hear we've got 15 positions open, none of which you're qualified for. So it gives you, it offers a really interesting opportunity in lead generation. And I think this is really important for actually an email strategy, which a lot of companies tend to struggle with. What do I email my candidates? When should I email them? These are really easy things that you can actually begin doing by talking about what's interesting. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this really heady thing. In most places, particularly white-collar professions, articles and websites get tossed around the office, right? And it says, I know we certainly do that here. We're like, did you see this website? Did you see this article? That is great candidate-facing content, actually, because you're giving a peek behind the scenes. You're giving a sense of your culture, right? And you might say, hey, here's a website we were discussing over coffee the other day. So you're telling a candidate, hey, we actually discussed things in this office. Here's the kind of things that we're interested in. And if you're interested in this kind of thing, you should really look at our brand more closely. But it also doesn't have to be that heady. It could also be something of, you know, here are the places that people in our office go to eat lunch the most, right? And if a candidate is in that physical proximity, particularly if you're doing some more geo-targeted stuff, that could be a really good opportunity to sort of develop some sort of brand journalism and be known as this place that, like, they always give you really good tips, right? And that might be just the lead-in that somebody needs to sort of keep that brand in consideration and at the forefront of your mind.
Yeah, you know, there's a lesson that a lot of people on the consumer, mostly like B2B marketing side are learning, which is, you know, they spent a lot of time when the whole inbound marketing thing started, this idea of kind of content marketing, of, you know, creating a lot of content. At the beginning, they spent a lot of time creating content that was just stuff about their brand, and they realized that the value they were getting from all of the content and the attention was really about, you know, staying in front of that audience. And they realized that I don't need to say only things about my brand and my product. I can talk about anything. And if my audience cares about it, I'm getting good quality time with them. And I think that same thing kind of translates to this side. And there was a story that I had heard about a company that was in New Orleans that was some kind of repair. They repaired something, I forget what it was, some kind of electrical devices, and they discovered, they started measuring the engagement with their newsletter, and they discovered that what really made the engagement skyrocket was when they started including things about New Orleans in the newsletter, like things about Mardi Gras and things about New Orleans traditions, because it has a very rich history, and the readership of their newsletter skyrocketed. The open rate got a lot bigger. Then they started including like personal employee stories about what their employees were doing. That also gave them a big bump. And so they had amazing engagement. They weren't talking about their brand, but they were in front of these people all of the time, and they still had brand messages in there. Yeah. So it was just like a nice lesson.
And I think that goes to talking about a brand and what's where your brand value represents, right, versus sort of the features, right? And this is always what we kind of counsel our clients on is your EVP is really important, but your EVP is not the same thing as your brand. Your brand is a much bigger thing that encompasses a lot. So think about that when you're sort of thinking about, okay, how could I do this? And begin to experiment, right? This is the easiest way to do it. It doesn't, you might fail the first few times, right? Nobody clicks on your stuff. That's okay. Keep on trying, keep on seeing, and find what your audience is interested in, and then build upon that. So the last of our trends, the big trends, is around consumer brand consciousness. This has been, I think, something that people come to us left, right, up, and down. I've got this consumer brand. I don't know what to do with it. My marketing folks don't even know what I do. What we're seeing here is actually more and more a trend towards sort of merging, not necessarily the messages, but sort of realizing how the consumer brand and the employer brand begin to interact with each other. It's really important to recognize that only a handful of brands are known for their employer brand, that most brands are known for their consumer brand first and foremost. And in fact, that's probably the way that your candidates knew about you in the first place. Even in sort of lesser known brands like some of the stuff in the tech space, it's probably because they interacted with your product or heard somebody talk about your product and we're aware of that. I think there's a really good example here of how the consumer brand can shape your employee brand and vice versa. There are a couple, so the first one is Warby Parker. For those of you who don't know, it's a brand that makes eyeglasses, and very famously, when you buy a pair of Warby Parkers, they donate a pair of Warby Parkers to someone in need. So their consumer product is really about this idea of sort of social consciousness, but that's also informed their employer brand because a lot of people want to work for Warby Parker because they know that they're a brand that does social good, right? This isn't something that they hide on their sustainability page. This is something that they actually embed into the product. And so it's a really good opportunity for an employer brand to be able to sort of build off that opportunity. At the opposite side of this is Microsoft, which I think is a really interesting case study. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles right now about how no one wanted to work for Microsoft for a while. It was like seen as the dead kid in the tech space. They weren't innovating. It didn't seem like they weren't really doing anything interesting. It seemed just bureaucratic. And then all of a sudden, Microsoft started changing things with their consumer products. They released the Surface tablet, which really kind of revolutionized what a business tablet could be. And recently they released a new product called HoloLens, which actually offers an augmented reality space to sort of somebody who puts on these glasses. It's kind of like Google Glass in a way. And now all of a sudden they're becoming seen as cool again, right? And it's driven, yes, partly by their leadership, but also through their products. That influences their employer brand, right? When your products are cool, it's a lot easier to recruit. I think everybody knows that. So it's important that, like, from a, in terms of capturing the trend, what can I do? Start talking to marketing, right? If you've never met your marketing person or have no relationship to them, make that absolutely one of your goals and priorities this year. And begin to actually formulate an integrated strategy. So when you have a new big product announcement, let the marketing folks do their product announcement, and then maybe on the employer brand side, you create a video that talks about the people who made that product, right? And that's really great content for your social channels. Or talk about how that product was made and what it says about your culture. And then also, to the other side of that, talk about products in your recruitment and internal channels. Don't be afraid. Too many people really keep these things completely and utterly separate. And I think while that makes sense in some cases, and it's definitely a case-by-case basis, in many cases, it's a great thing to talk about your products because your employees are excited about your products. We did a great engagement, actually, earlier this year with Pennzoil. Actually, we won grand prize, actually, off of the back of that. And that was really about internal excitement. And it was about engaging employees in a really interesting and interactive way with their product and the product development. And not only did it sort of help to promote the product, but it also helped to sort of promote the brand. So I think that's a really good example of sort of where the consumer and employer brand can, instead of being at loggerheads and competing with each other, work together in a really mutually beneficial way. Quick win on this one, probably a little bit less structured, but audit your consumer brand. So pretend you're a candidate. Look at your consumer-facing site and say, if I knew nothing about what it's like to work here, what does my consumer brand say about our company? Right? A lot of consumer brands have a lot more employee stories and behind-the-scenes stuff. They talk about how it's made, the values that the company embodies. Try to understand that and play off of those. Or if there isn't anything, use your employer brand and your career site and your candidate journey and your actually internal communications to tell the other side of that story. So if you're on Jif and it only just says, here's Jif peanut butter and it's 210 calories per serving, make sure that your employer brand is actually telling the larger story about, how people work at that place, and get employees excited about sort of what they're creating and what they're doing for that brand. I think that's a huge opportunity to, instead of being afraid of your consumer brand, to really engage with it. So we wanted to also feature, beyond that kind of one to watch, which is that tech is getting really personal. We already kind of highlighted this with the Jawbone example, but really what we're seeing is what people are either calling a coding of new data onto our lives or a layer of new data. I like the coding because I think it's just kind of an interesting visual, that the idea that sort of as we walk around ourselves, there's this sort of coding of kind of augmented reality, augmented data that's really being thrown around us. Some good examples of this, as I talked about, the Microsoft HoloLens, that's really about sort of an intimate connection. It's actually a holographic display where you can sort of see your Windows desktop and touch it and interact with it like Minority Report. Again, sort of augmenting sort of a traditional experience. Skype is really interesting. Skype, if you don't know, recently released a Skype translator. So let's say you're talking to a candidate from Dubai, and you don't speak Arabic, and he doesn't speak English. Skype translator, when you get on, will do real-time translation of what you're both saying, right? That's an augmented experience. It's kind of insane, but it totally works. And so this is a really interesting way of sort of different ways that we can begin engaging. I have a ring on here because this is actually a digital mood ring. What we're seeing more and more is actually people considering mood when it comes to sort of how they're interacting with brands. One of the things that you probably know is that a happier candidate or a really frustrated candidate makes for a different type of sell. And so considering your mood, and I think this is something that we'll see career sites asking for more and more, and finding ways to get input of mood, input of how you are in your life. You know, you want to go sort of real futuristic. You can imagine a situation where basically my fitness tracker says that I haven't exercised in a few days, and I've been feeling, and my mood has been kind of down, and I'm feeling sluggish, and it also notices, because it's connected to my calendar, that I've been really, really, really busy at work. Let's say there was some, that you noticed that in LinkedIn, because I normally post a lot of stuff and I hadn't been recently, right? That may either be an opportunity to sort of enter into that recruitment process and just reach out and say, hey, really know you're busy right now, but if you're ever kind of, you know, interested in maybe getting a little bit more work-life balance, here's a great company. Or maybe vice versa, it's kind of knowing that, in fact, because that current candidate is actually really busy, stay away from them, right, and wait till there's a little bit more free space so they're actually going to be more open to your pitch. So just something to kind of think about, but these are probably, frankly, the Microsoft HoloLens will be released this year. Oculus Rift, which is a virtual reality platform, has been released. And we'll be seeing more development in that. But really, the investment level in these is pretty high right now. So, you know, if you've got $2 million lying around, please contact us. We would love to help you do this. But assuming that you don't, I think a lot of people are kind of waiting to see how this plays out, what consumer adoption of it looks like. But I think you will begin to see a way to sort of capture that trend really very simply. Is begin to sort of ask for more input on your career site and actually ask a little bit about attitudinal data, where are you, how are you feeling, and begin to sort of get that and begin to think about how you can begin to layer on a little bit more of a rich experience that sort of brings back the idea of intimacy into the sort of career site and candidate experience overall.
Yeah, you know, Stephen, the mood thing I thought is so interesting because, like you said, you don't necessarily have to put a ring on every candidate to get some feedback on what mood they're in, right? Like, there are actually easy ways you could incorporate that and then take that information and do a lot with it, right? Like, because you imagine, right, if you could tell that somebody was, you know, in somewhat of a frustrated mood, and maybe if you even dug one level further and found out that they're in a frustrated mood because their boss at their current job is the worst boss in the world, right? Like, the most important thing you could say to them, you know, might be around the fact that maybe your company, not only does it have a great performance evaluation system for employees, but then employees in turn get to rate their managers. And, you know, we help solve some of those problems. Like, that would completely sell somebody on that opportunity potentially by just sort of understanding a little bit about that, understanding that they were frustrated and just a little bit of around why. Could make a huge difference. And so imagine the experience of somebody who came through with that frustrated feeling, seeing this company who basically they feel like they have that problem solved, right?
Yeah.
Like, it immediately kind of opens up, it's going to open up a bit into their culture, but it's also going to recognize that, hey, you know, they've solved this problem, and this definitely is a place I would be interested, you know, maybe in looking for a career with. So that to me was really interesting.
And I think really in all this space, really it kind of does frankly boil down to sort of exposing your culture and exposing the way you do things, right? Frankly, it's going to be hard for any brand to compete on benefits anymore. Even salary, people don't care about that much as they used to because sort of expectations have changed. It's still a very important driver, and still so benefits are an important driver, but people are willing to sort of forgive a lot for a culture that feels really supportive, and a culture that feels like they can grow. And so I think if there's really one message that you sort of see, and this is something that you'll probably see us harping on and on about, is that really it's the importance of exposing culture. It's one of the things that brands have been talking about for a while and might be embedded in the brand, but really 2015 is the year to really bring that to life in interesting ways, and be unafraid to sort of say kind of who you are and understand who you are.
Awesome, Stephen. Well, thank you to everybody. We're at the end of our regularly scheduled content. If you have any questions, feel free to send them through the Q&A box that's in the WebEx. You can also tweet them using our hashtag, which is on the screen right now. It's Inside Insights. You can always send them there, and even if you don't send them right this minute, any questions that come through kind of any of these possible ways, we will absolutely answer about this content, about anything else. So while we're waiting to see if anything comes in, just in case, I'll close and just say that thanks for everybody who joined. We really appreciate spending the time with us. We really hope you found it to be useful. We try so hard to put together content that we think will be interesting. We try to put it together in a way we think will be fun. And you know, the webinar is recorded. It'll be available. So if you have colleagues who you think would benefit from it, you'll be able to send them that link. The original landing page and ways that you came to this are always going to be still available. So you can come back and find it through that way. But you know, also always, if you have any suggestions for any topics that you'd like us to cover, or just even any questions, like I said, anytime, feel free to send them through. If you didn't figure it out from joining these webinars, I know I recognize a lot of the names of people who register, so we know that we have kind of a lot of regular folks there. But if you didn't already figure it out, we really love talking about these topics, both on webinars and with clients and prospects in person, on various like electronic forms. We're just, that's part of our culture, since we're talking about cultures. Our culture is really about kind of thinking and really trying to come up with, you know, the best solutions possible that are, you know, not ways that we can package up products, but really more, how can we solve real problems and help our clients to come up with, you know, really great solutions together so that, you know, we know that we're really solving the problem. And, you know, at the end of the day, we love nothing more than making our clients look like rock stars. So that's kind of like our goal in the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think that really actually to that end, you know, if you're in the New York area, feel free to stop by. We would love to sort of have some coffee and chat, or we can all jump into a chat room actually and whiteboard out your problem.
If we can find one.
If we can find one. We might have to take you on a hunt around the office. But the other side of that is, you know, feel free also to do that in our offices in LA, our offices in DC, our offices in Atlanta. And we've got a few other folks kind of scattered around the country. So we've got people in Cincinnati and people in the Philadelphia area. So, you know, if you're, and in San Francisco and in Seattle. So if you're interested in talking to anybody about, like, seriously, we love to just kind of hear what's going on, hear what your problems are, because I think it's a really interesting thing, and that's how we sort of begin to gather these trends, and that's how we really begin to understand what the space is looking like for clients sort of both old and new.
Yeah, great. So yeah, for those of you on the phone who are people who do engage with us on a regular basis, doubly thank you for giving us ideas and really inspiring us to go and hunt down kind of the best stuff for you. So thanks for that. Thanks to everybody who presented and supported this, and we're going to wrap it up.
That concludes the Inside Insights webinar, Recruitment and Retention Trends for 2015. If you would like to watch a recording of this webinar or view the presentation materials, a link will be sent via email to all those who registered for this webinar. We will also be providing you information on the next webinar soon. Thank you for joining us.